Orders came through at 0300. Within the hour, base lights were on across 3 installations. Commanders assembled unit leaders. Briefings were short, the mission was clear. U.S. naval forces were moving toward the Strait of Hormuz. At Naval Station Norfolk, deck crews were already moving. Forklifts carried pallets of equipment toward the pier. Sailors in work gear ran pre-deployment checks on systems and machinery. Lines of supply trucks pulled up to the dock, one after another. Aboard the USS Baton, an amphibious assault ship, Marine units were receiving their gear assignments. Rifles were checked. Body armor was fitted. Rucksacks were packed and sealed. Crates of ammunition were moved through the lower decks by hand and cart. Everything was logged. Everything was accounted for. On the flight deck, on CH-53E, Super Stallion helicopters sat in position. Crew chiefs walked around each aircraft with flashlights. They checked rotor systems, hydraulic lines, and fuel connections. MV-22 Osprey tilt rotors were folded and moved into position near the deck elevator. Ground crews worked fast and quiet. At 29 Palms, Marine combat engineers were loading specialized equipment onto flatbed trucks. Mine clearance systems, breaching gear, underwater demolition tools, and diving equipment were packed into sealed containers. Trucks moved them to the airfield before sunrise. C-17 Globemaster aircraft were waiting at the runway with rear ramps lowered. Loadmasters directed equipment onto each aircraft. Vehicles were driven up the ramps and chained to the deck. Troops filed aboard and took their seats along the sides of the cargo bay. Within 2 hours, 4 C-17s were loaded and taxiing. At RAF Fairford, in the United Kingdom, B-52 Stratofortress bombers were activated. Weapons crews arrived with carts loaded with JDAM kits, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and conventional bombs. Armorers in orange and green vests loaded weapons onto the underwing pylons. Ground crews fueled the aircraft. Pilots reviewed mission packages inside the operations building. In the Persian Gulf, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group was already repositioning. FA-18 Super Hornets on the flight deck were inspected by plane captains. Ordnance crews finished loading targeting pods and air-to-air missiles. The USS Cole and USS Gravely spread out to form a defensive screen around the carrier. Sonar operators in the combat information centers monitored the water around the formation for any movement. The USS Baton departed port, joined by the USS New York and USS Arlington. The 3 ships moved in column formation at 15 knots. Below decks, Marines assigned to explosive ordnance disposal teams ran equipment checks on their mine hunting gear. Divers tested their underwater propulsion vehicles in the ship's flooded well deck. Sonar equipment was powered on and calibrated. C-130 Hercules aircraft from Naval Air Station Jacksonville departed with additional EOD supplies and personnel. Navy divers and Marine engineers sat inside with personal equipment stowed in overhead nets. Everyone reviewed maps and mission briefs. At Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, FF-35C, Lightning II fighters were diverted to the base to increase land-based air coverage. Crew chiefs received the aircraft on the ramp. Ground crews plugged in power carts. Within hours, the F-35s were fueled, armed, and placed on alert status. AH-64 Apache attack helicopters arrived by C-17 and were offloaded and reassembled on the base ramp. Mechanics reattached rotor blades and reconnected systems. Each Apache was test run before being declared ready. Within 12 hours, 2 Apache teams were mission ready. At the Strait of Hormuz, the first phase of the mine clearing operation was beginning. MH-60S, Nighthawk helicopters, launched from the USS Baton, equipped with AN/AQS-20 sonar towing systems. These helicopters flew low and slow over the designated shipping lanes. The sonar systems trailed beneath the aircraft on cables, these sweeping the water for mine signatures. data transmitted in real time back to the ship's operations center. Navy EOD divers entered the water from rigid hull inflatable boats launched from the well deck. Working in pairs, the divers descended with propulsion vehicles and underwater cameras. They moved along the bottom in a grid pattern. Any object matching the profile of a moored mine was photographed and marked with a buoy. Above the operation, two FA-18 Super Hornets maintained a combat air patrol at 15,000 feet. Electronic warfare aircraft circled farther out, monitoring the electromagnetic spectrum for any targeting activity from the shore. On the flight deck of the USS Bataan, UH-1Y Venom helicopters launched on perimeter patrol. The Venoms flew at low altitude around the ship formation. Door gunners scanned the water surface and shoreline through optical systems. Ashore at a forward operating base on the Arabian Peninsula, Marine Corps forces were moving in. 7-ton trucks carried equipment from the airfield to the base perimeter. Communications teams erected antenna masts and ran cable to the command post tent. Satellite dishes were aimed and locked. Within 6 hours, secure voice and data communications were established back to Central Command. Fuel trucks arrived and began filling bladder tanks around the camp. Ammunition was offloaded and placed into supply points under camouflage netting. Generators were started. Marines dug fighting positions at the entry points. Guard posts were set at each corner of the base. Back at sea, a remote influence minesweeping system was deployed from the USS Bataan. The system used acoustic and magnetic signals to trigger pressure-sensitive mines at a safe distance. Sailors operated the equipment from a control console on the well deck. As the system passed through a marked area, 2 detonations were recorded at depth. Columns of water rose into the air 200 meters behind the ship. The MH-60S helicopters continued their sweeping runs. EOD divers were dispatched to each marked location. The process was methodical. Each contact was identified before any neutralization action was taken. Marine reconnaissance teams departed the forward base in Humvees and JLTV light vehicles. The convoy moved south along the coast road in a staggered column. Each vehicle had a gunner on the roof-mounted weapon system. The patrol established overwatch positions on high ground overlooking the strait. Observation posts were set up, and surface traffic in the shipping lane was being reported. Throughout the night, helicopters continued sweeping. EOD teams continued their dives. Ships maintained their formation. Radio traffic was constant but controlled. Each element reported status on schedule. The operation moved forward one cleared sector at a time. By the following morning, the first shipping corridor through the northeastern approach had been swept and declared clear. A minesweeping report was transmitted to 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Naval commanders marked the cleared lane on operational charts. A navigational advisory was issued to commercial shipping. On the Bataan flight deck, crews were already prepping the next wave of helicopters. Fuel hoses were connected. Sonar systems were checked and reset. And divers rested below decks before their next deployment. A second C-130 was tasked and loaded at Al Udeid with additional diving equipment and 2 more EOD teams. It departed within the hour. The mine clearing operation was expanding to a second corridor to the south. Ships moved. Helicopters swept. Divers descended. Marines patrolled. Aircraft orbited. Every element of the force was working its assigned task. The strait was being opened, one cleared sector at a time, methodically and without pause.